Good evening, welcome to This Week in Turkey. 7 of the 12 arrested suspects on the Cumhuriyet trial were released earlier tonight following more than 200 days in jail. Tonight in the studio we're joined by our reporter Şükran Şençekiçer. Hello, Hi. Şükran, who's been following the trial at the Istanbul courthouse in Çağlayan for the entire week. So a verdict has been reached tonight, Şükran, as you know, earlier tonight at 7:40 to be exact. So what can you tell us about the details of this verdict?
For the beginning, 17 people working in Cumhuriyet newspaper were on trial, and 11 of them were jailed for almost 9 months. They were accused of aiding terrorist groups and without being members of them. And they were accused because of their news, interviews, tweets. Today, an interim decision has been reached, and 7 people were released. The journalists who have been released are Güray Öz, Turhan Günay, Bülent Utku, Mustafa Güngör, Hakan Kara, Önder Çelik, and Musa Kart. Musa Kart is a cartoonist, you know. And the court ruled to continue the imprisonment of 4 people, Akın Atalay, Murat Sabuncu, Kadri Gürsel, and Ahmet Şık. The next hearing will be on September 11th. And also, there are new charges against Ahmet Şık for his defense testimony.
You mentioned Ahmet Şık, and actually some comments made by Ahmet Şık tonight following the decision sparked a lot of interest in social media. Can you tell us what these comments were?
And after hearing the verdict, Ahmet Şık said, "I only ever vowed to kiss the hand of my mother and father, and it will continue to be the only time I bow."
And Şükran, you've been at the courthouse in Çağlayan for the past 5 days, every day, and you've spent a lot of time with the crowd there, the families and the friends of the people being tried, as well as members of the public. So what can you tell us about the general atmosphere in Çağlayan?
We've been following the case since Monday in Istanbul courthouse, and people were gathering in the court and also in the yard for 5 days. They called for the release of the journalists. People were nervous, actually, but they were also hopeful, and they were relative supporters of the defendants. And today we talked to them, we asked them, they were hoping bringing the journalists to their homes. And they were press releases, protests, slogans, and now they have to wait for September 11th.
Thank you very much, Şükran. Now we'll hear more about the verdict and the trial in our next news video, and then we'll be back in the studio.
The Cumhuriyet trial, in which 17 Cumhuriyet journalists and managers are being tried, started on Monday. Employees of the Cumhuriyet newspaper, including reporters, columnists, and board members, are accused of misconduct and aiding an armed terrorist organization as a non-member. The 324-page indictment argues that the Cumhuriyet journalists and executives pursued an editorial line that favored Fethullah Gülen and the Gülenists, as well as the PKK and the DHKPC, a far-left armed group. 12 of Cumhuriyet's employees have been in pre-trial detention for 267 days. The evidence presented by the prosecutor cast serious doubts on the validity of the indictment. Cases hinge on the reporter's employment records, articles, contacts, television appearances, and tweets, in other words, routine journalistic activities. The bulk of the evidence against the journalists consists of their writing. Many are accused of corresponding with people who had downloaded the messaging app popular with Gülen supporters, known as Baylock. Simply receiving text messages from people who subsequently turned out to be Baylock users is treated as evidence of guilt. Cumhuriyet Ankara correspondent Erdem Gülen Özgür Mumcu, a journalist and lawyer who writes for the Cumhuriyet Daily and teaches law at Galatasaray University, commented on the Cumhuriyet trial for Medyascope TV.
They try to criminalize journalism. This trial openly shows this. Yes, our friends at Cumhuriyet are paying the price, but through Cumhuriyet, they want to bring the Turkish media into line. This indictment is one of the most nonsense indictments I have ever encountered. I have read many nonsense indictments in Turkey, but at least when Gülenists were ruling the judiciary, they were putting an effort to build up evidence. They had to come up with some sort of evidence. In this trial, they didn't even bother to build up evidence. There is no evidence.
Tonight we're joined by Stefan Ellis, who is the Director of Advocacy and Communications in the International Press Institute, IPI. Good evening, Mr. Ellis.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So, as you know, an interim decision has been reached earlier tonight on the Cumhuriyet trial. So, for starters, what can you tell us about tonight's decision?
Well, from what we understand, the court decided to release 7 of the 11 defendants who have been behind bars for the better part of the last 9 months. But the court also decided to keep 4 others in pretrial detention while the case continues going forward. We are extremely happy that 7 of them have been released. That's a positive sign. But the fact that the court did not allow the other 4 to be released is very troubling to us because we do not believe that this is a legitimate case.
Mm-hmm. And let's now continue with, as you said, there are positive and negative sides to this decision. So do you think that this decision carries the potential of changing Europe's and the West in general, the image shared by the West of Turkey and press freedom right now?
Well, the decision is a good first step towards doing that. The decision on its own certainly will not. And the fact that these other 4 journalists are still behind bars, and to my knowledge, there was no explanation as to why 7 were released and 4 were retained. I think the fact that there's confusion about this and that 4 are still behind bars will lead many people to conclude that there is still a lot of work to be done in Turkey in terms of respect for rule of law and human rights.
Mm-hmm. And now let's leave aside tonight's decision and let's concentrate on the trial as a whole. What can you tell us about this trial, and what can you tell us about its significance for the deteriorating situation of press freedom in Turkey?
Well, I was in Turkey earlier this week with a delegation of international observers watching the proceedings in the trial. As part of that mission, we not only observed the proceedings in person, but we reviewed a number of materials in connection with the case, including the indictment itself. We are, at least at IPI, we're extremely concerned about this case. We view it as a politically motivated attempt to criminalize journalism. And we're very scared that it has a chilling effect on other journalists in Turkey, both domestic journalists and foreign journalists who may be operating there. The case overall is somewhat emblematic of the situation of press freedom in Turkey. There are more than 150 journalists in prison as of today that we are aware of. We believe that many, if not most, are imprisoned in relation to their work in journalism. And the fact that a case like this was allowed to go this far to basically bring criminal charges on extremely flimsy evidence and throw people in prison for almost 9 months shows every journalist operating in Turkey that they could potentially be the subject of that sort of arbitrary action.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Ellis, are you able to comment on why some of the journalists were released and some weren't?
Unfortunately, I do not know in terms of the Cumhuriyet decision today. And it's important to note that as of right now, I understand there's an order for them to be released. I expect and hope that they will be released tonight. But as we've seen in some other cases, when judges have ordered journalists who are on trial to be released, the government has come up with another excuse to hold those journalists and then has turned an investigation or opened an investigation into those judges themselves. So we applaud the fact that the judges did release these 7 defendants. That is definitely a first step, but we need to see if the government honors that order. And unfortunately, I don't know the reasoning behind it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mr. Ellis, for your comments and for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
We'll continue with our next video on the defense statements of the journalists being tried on the Cumhuriyet trial.
The Cumhuriyet trial started on Monday with executives, journalists, and employees from the Cumhuriyet Daily making their pleas during the week. In the first hearing, Cumhuriyet columnist and International Press Institute board member Kadir Gürsel delivered a stirring defense of the rights of journalists. After explaining how the allegations against him are one by one unreal and baseless, he completed his defense statements as follows.
I am a columnist who has been openly warning for years in every medium that the Turkish regime is becoming more authoritarian. In 2009, I wrote a column for Milliyet Daily called "We are on our way to an authoritarian regime with elections." Since then, I have warned in many columns of the regime's increasing authoritarian tendencies. Unfortunately, my foresight has become real. Otherwise, I wouldn't be on trial today as a criminal thought, and I wouldn't have had to wait 9 months in prison before having the opportunity to refute all of these baseless, empty and unfounded accusations in front of a court. All these charges against me not only lack intelligence and logic, but they are also outside of any standard of law and conscience. These charges only produce injustice.
Cartoonist Musa Kart also made his plea on Monday. Kart's cynical comments were greeted with laughter in the court. After showing some of his cartoons as evidence of his impartiality, he told,
"Yes, in my life as a cartoonist, I have aided and abetted only one organization. And the name of this organization is the ACC, which is the acronym for All My Country's Children. Among the members is my granddaughter, who is 2.5. I know for a fact that children of the members of your board and the children of all of our friends who are present in the courtroom here today are among the members of this organization. I asked my granddaughter what the purpose of this organization was, and she said, 'Grandpa, we want to live like our friends in the West. We want our lives to be free and happy too. We want to live in nice, stable homes and be taught in good schools. And we don't want anybody to die or anything like that.'"
On the third day of the trial, journalist Ahmet Şık, who is known for his books on how the Gülen community infiltrated into the state and the relationship between the Gülen movement and the ruling AKP, made a historic defense statement. After explaining how the indictment is completely baseless, Şık said,
"You must have understood from what I've told you so far. What I say is not a defense or expression. On the contrary, it is an accusation. Because, as it states at the beginning of this text, the indictment that prepares the legal cover of this political operation does not legalize the shame that must be treated as trash. Just as some people who have their roles as judges and prosecutors before and after this political operation did not make themselves jurists."
During his statement, Şık continued to expose the relationship between the Gülenist terror organization and the AKP, demonstrating numerous pieces of evidence and data. In the end, the striking final of Şık's statement was applauded by those who were in the courtroom. Şık said,
"Therefore, I will continue to respect truth more than myself and continue to refuse being one of the conformists that deny the truth. For this, it is obvious that a price must be paid. But do not think that this scares us. Neither I nor the journalists on the outside that I'm proud to be friends with are not afraid of you, whomever you might be. Because we know that what scares the tyrants most is courage. And the tyrants should know that no cruelty can prevent the progress of history. Down with tyranny, long live freedom."
President Erdogan announced on Tuesday that Turkey and Russia have signed an agreement on the purchase of the S-400 missile systems. Kremlin, on the other hand, is yet to confirm the decision.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced on Tuesday that Turkey and Russia have signed an agreement on the purchase of the S-400 missile systems. In his party AKP's parliamentary group meeting, Erdogan said, "Upon my return from the Qatar visit, a press member said, if there were an agreement on the S-400 missile systems between Turkey and Russia, this would cause a tension between Turkey and the US. A country must search for the most ideal solutions for its national security. If we cannot get what we want with the US, then we have to be in search of other options. And these are the products of this search. Look at NATO. Greece, which has been a NATO member for years, is using the S-300 systems. So why should this disturb anyone? We have signed a deal with Russia. Hopefully we will see the S-400s in our country soon. In a television program, the president's spokesman Ibrahim Kalın said, "We can easily say that this deal is done to a large extent. There are a few points left about the agreement. We can say that the main lines of the agreement are complete." According to the terms of the agreement, the total value will be at $3.4 billion and the system will be given to Turkey in 2019. The other two systems will be produced jointly by Turkey and Russia. However, according to Sputnik News Agency, the final agreement has not been signed. The Russian military and technical officials who have spoken to the Russian newspaper Kommersant have said that the meeting has been held for a long time, but it's too early to say that the agreement has been signed. Timur Ahmetov, who is an expert at the Council of Foreign Relations of Russia, said that the statements of Erdogan are about establishing superiority against the West. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov also refused to confirm the statement and said that they won't comment on the issue.
The relations between Turkey and Israel are strained once again following President Erdogan's remarks on the Al-Aqsa crisis.
The relations between Turkey and Israel become tense once again after Alperen Ocakları, a Turkish Islamist right-wing group, threw rocks at the Neve Shalom synagogue in Istanbul last Friday as a response to the recently increased security measures at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Kürşat Mircan, the president of Alperen Ocakları in Istanbul, said about the incident, "We're protesting here. The Zionists should get their acts together. They cannot prevent our brothers' freedom of religion. Just like you violate our freedom of religion there, we will violate your freedom of religion here. Just like we're standing here today, we will come again tomorrow. You won't be able to step in." State news agency Anatolian Agency's report on the protests against the closing of the Al-Aqsa Mosque featured a picture of the Alperen Ocakları attack at the Neve Shalom synagogue. Anadolu Agency later removed the photos following heavy criticism. Various MPs from the ruling AKP denounced the act, drawing attention to the difference between the Israeli state and the Turkish Jews. They stated that the discontent with the Israeli state can be demonstrated through legal ways, but not through putting the Turkish Jews under distress. Opposition HDP member of the parliament, Garo Paylan, brought the issue to the parliament, asking how and why the act was not prevented when the synagogue was under a 24-hour protection by the law enforcement officers. Meanwhile, Devlet Bahçeli, leader of the Nationalist Action Party, MHP, stated that he was following the news with worry and that he disapproved of the dividing acts within the Turkish public. The day after the Neve Shalom attacks, another group of protesters from the Great Ottoman Association left an X-ray machine in front of the Ahrida synagogue in Balat. The president of the organization stated that they had shown tolerance, but that Israel had crossed the line now. Before embarking on his visit to the Gulf states, President Erdogan said, "The reactions should be within the legal framework and temperate." He called for Israel to act legally and with respect to humanistic values. Speaking at the AKP faction meeting, President Erdogan said that they would not accept the treatment of Muslims as terrorists and described the acts of Israel as an attempt to take the Al-Aqsa Mosque away from the Muslims. Israeli soldiers are defiling Al-Aqsa with their combat boots by using simple excuses to easily shed blood there, he said and continued. Israel is harming Jerusalem's Islamic character. Nobody should expect us to remain silent against the double standards in Jerusalem, Erdogan said. Following a statement by the Turkish Foreign Ministry criticizing Israel's response to the comments made by Erdogan, the Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesman Emmanuel Nahshon said, "The days of the Ottoman Empire have passed. It's absurd that the Turkish government, which occupies northern Cyprus, brutally represses the Kurdish minority and jails journalists, lectures Israel, the only true democracy in the region." 2 weeks after the start of the protests, Israel removed the security measures and the Islamic Waqf officials announced that Muslims could pray inside the mosque again. Regarding the once again strained relations between Turkey and Israel, Guardian writer Peter Beaumont commented that Erdogan's intervention looks set to raise the temperature again, with Israel's foreign ministry accusing Turkey of behaviors as though the Ottoman Empire still existed.
Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu and EU Affairs Minister Ömer Çelik visited Brussels this week to attend the Turkey-EU Ministerial Political Dialogue meeting.
On July 25th, Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu and Minister for EU Affairs Ömer Çelik visited Brussels to attend the Turkey-EU Ministerial Political Dialogue meeting. The meeting took place after months-long strained relations between the two sides, against the backdrop of a deal with Turkey to prevent migrants leaving its shores for Europe and the security crackdown since last year's coup attempt. The representatives from the European bloc were the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs Federica Mogherini and EU Commissioner for Neighbourhood Policy and Enlargement Negotiations Johannes Hahn. After the meeting, a joint press conference was held in which the EU expressed its most public criticism yet of Turkey's security crackdown since last year's failed coup, according to Reuters. Although Mogherini described the meeting as constructive, Hahn stressed that Turkey must show a reversal of trend towards authoritarianism. In addition, a diplomat of the EU noted that Turkey is clearly moving away from the EU standards. The destruction job against human rights and rule of law continues. Çavuşoğlu stated that the scale of the crackdown is justified, given the seriousness of the failed coup attempt. Regarding the criticisms on the trial of prominent Turkish journalists, he replied with the following words. There are those journalists, soldiers, politicians who helped the coup attempts last year. They need to face the sentences that are necessary.
Now let's have a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
Bozcaada Jazz Festival kicked off today and will be on until the 30th of July at Ayazma Monastery in Çanakkale, with a varied lineup including Jülide Özçelik, Sebastian Studnutski, Elif Çağlar Quartet, Edis Hafızoğlu, Nazdrave featuring Ülke Aybala Sunat, Maden Öktem Ersönmez, Çağrı Sertel, Lara Dilara, and Korhan Futacı. A retrospective of one of the most beloved painters of Turkey, Feyhaman Duran. The exhibition is on display in the new cornucopia, number 55 of the Magnificent Museum on the banks of the Bosphorus, the Sakıp Sabancı Museum. Also worth seeing is the tribute of Morin Freely's movement to Feyhaman and his wife and artist Güzen, with photographs of Fritz von der Schulenburg's house and artist studio. You can visit the exhibition until 13th of August.
Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next week at 9 p.m. Bye.